Hey, welcome back. First week of January 2024. Good time of year. Summer Nats is on. Supercross is about to start. But we're going to start off in the shed making this back wheel fit, this CBR 450. So at the end of the last video I sort of briefly touched on the issues with this wheel. So you can see it a bit better here. It's just way over to the right in the swing arm, and that's because on the Ninja 250 that this wheel's from, the swing arm actually flares out quite a bit to the left, and yeah, the wheel fits centered on that bike, but this one, as you can see, it's not even close. So I need to address a couple of things. The first thing I need to do is sort out the axle. This wheel came with a 17mm axle, and the KTM axle is a 20mm diameter. The easiest way to fix that normally would be just to machine up a sleeve or like a collar. It slides into the swing arm, and the axle can just slide into that. You could incorporate it into an axle block. Wouldn't be that difficult, but this axle's not long enough anyway, so even if I wanted to do that, I couldn't use it. And also I'd rather use a 20mm axle. It's just a bit stronger. It means I can use some KTM motocross bike chain adjuster blocks, so they look a bit better, and yeah, it's just going to be a better axle. So first thing I need to do is get this wheel out and see if I can sort out some bearings to fit the new 20mm KTM axle. Alright, wheels out. So I've just knocked out the standard bearings. Did that the other day. There's a smaller one on the sprocket side. This larger one sat on the disc side, and then in the sprocket carrier itself there's a separate bearing there. So here's the differences in the axles. Standard Kawasaki axle. If it'll focus. Actually 15mm, I thought it was 17. Anyway, that doesn't matter. So we're ditching that, we're not going to use that. And then KTM axle here, 20mm. So I needed to get some bearings with this same outside diameter but the 20mm internal, so I could knock these into the wheel. I went down to the bearing supply store. I was able to get the larger one for the disc side, that was no problem. Same outside diameter, just with the 20mm center. So that one's all good, I can chuck that one in. But then on the other side, this inside bearing on the sprocket side, hang on, I'll flip this wheel. So it normally sits in there. They don't make a bearing, apparently, that is a 40mm outside diameter and a 20mm inside diameter. So the closest I could get was this one here, which is a 42mm outside diameter. So I was about to start machining out the inside of this, or working out how I was going to machine out the inside of this, just to take 2mm out to get that on. And I thought I'd just have a quick look online to see if I can make sure that I definitely can't get a bearing the right size, and I think I might have found one. So the bearing shop that stocks those is closed today, so I'll have to go down in a couple of days and see if they've got that. So hopefully that means I won't have to machine this out, because I'm not really sure how I'm going to do it, because obviously it won't fit in my lathe, and I don't have a mill, and I don't really want to pay someone to do it. So I'll see if I can get that bearing first. But anyway, we'll move on. Sprocket bearing here. So the inside diameter of this is actually 24mm. That's because it used to have a sleeve in it that the axle sat through for some reason. It seems strange to me. But I was able to get a bearing to replace this that has the 20mm inside diameter. So I'm just about to knock this out and tap this new one in. I'll put the other new bearing in the other side of the wheel, and at least then it will be able to be mocked up in the bike. I don't need to worry about this bearing for now, because it's still going to have one on this side in the sprocket carrier. So we'll get this bearing replaced and then chuck the wheel back in the bike with the new axle and see how we're looking. Right, this is actually the first time I've had this wheel sitting in the bike with the proper axle in, so even though it's missing that bearing from the inside there, I've still got the sprocket carrier one on the other side, so it's sitting square with the standard KTM axle. You can see what I mean by the axle blocks. So I'll replace these with some new ones, but just it's going to save a lot of dramas having to machine something else up. So that's cool, but now that it's sitting in here square, you can see how far over it is. Like, it's way over. If I put the ruler on it, I'll still rule, just very rough quick measurement. It's roughly from the rim edge there to the outside of the swing arm is about 95 millimeters. And then we'll have a look on the other side. Again, really rough, probably 75, just under. So I need to get this wheel to move over 20 millimeters. And as you can see, well, there's no room in there anyway. I've got like 3 or 4 millimeters between that sprocket carrier and the swing arm. But also I'm going to have an issue with keeping the sprocket aligned with the engine. So I can't remember how close this was. So I've got to put the engine back in the frame now, just so I can put the laser on the sprockets and see if the sprocket needs to move first, and then I've got to work out what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to see if I can machine 20 millimeters off the sprocket carrier here. I might have to take some off the wheel there as well, like that hub section. I don't know. I honestly have no idea how I'm going to do it. So yeah, we'll just get the engine in A first and see where the sprocket needs to be, and then we'll reassess. Alright, we've got the engine back in and we've got the laser sitting there, and I've just sat an old chain over the top of the sprockets. And as you can see, the sprocket's pretty much where it's going to need to be. It's slightly out, but I'm not too worried about that. I can tweak that with spacers and so on a bit later on, but I have come across this issue which I didn't even think about before, but it's a pretty big one. So I've never had a chain sit on this bike, but look at that, sitting on the swing arm. And then it gets worse. At the front, it would run straight across the top of the swing arm there. Fuck.
I am a complete jackass, and I have made a giant mistake here.
So, for a minute there, I was just like, fucking hell, I'm going to have to scrap this whole swing arm and come up with a new plan or lift the engine up higher. But just doing some quick measurements, I think if I just go to a larger front sprocket, I think I can go maybe 2 teeth bigger before I have to worry about the chain hitting on the case. I might still have to modify that case. So yeah, I'll go 2 teeth bigger on the front sprocket and just compensate for that with the rear sprocket, and I might just have to lower the shock a little bit, maybe take 20 mil of ride height out of it, and I think it'll clear just. So that's future Shane's problem. For now we've just got to get this back wheel centered, but yeah, that's a bummer. I was hoping I wasn't going to run into anything like that, but should have known that shit happens. So anyway, back to the sprocket. Yeah, so that's where it needs to be. So I'll turn this laser off, get that out of the way. So essentially what I need to do now is have the sprocket stay there, but the wheel needs to come across 20 millimeters. So to do that, I'm going to have to machine 20 millimeters off this sprocket carrier, or get the sprocket carrier to sit 20 millimeters further into the hub. I'm probably going to do a combination of both, so maybe like take 10 millimeters off this and 10 millimeters off the inside of the carrier so that it goes in further. But I'm not really sure, still not sure, but I think it's going to be doable. So get the wheel back out of it and we'll rattle this sprocket off the carrier, and then we'll start having a look at how we're going to get that 20 mil that I need. Right, so I've got the wheel back in. I've measured both sides. It's actually 22 millimeters over to the left. So we're going to have to find 11 millimeters out of this sprocket carrier.
It's about time.
So I've done a bit of measuring. Not sure if you can really see on this wheel here. Get the push out of the way. This lip here sits inside the carrier. Now that's what the carrier sits up against, that and this lip here. So that's what's stopping it from going in any further. So I think what I'm going to do is on this inside lip here is put that in the lathe and take 6mm off that. And then I don't think I have to take quite 6mm off these lugs because there's a bit of extra room in there, but I might have to take 3 or 4 off these as well. And then I'll have to shave 3 or 4mm off the sprocket drive cush there, the rubber. Then that's going to get me, yeah, my 5 or 6mm in, so that's going to sit further in. And then where the sprocket bolts, see there, so that's just screw in studs, and they're actually threaded all the way in through the back there. So I've got room to machine another 5mm off this outside here, and then what I'll do is I'll get rid of these studs and I'll use bolts. There's still going to be probably 12 or so mil of material for the bolt to go to, and then if I think it's not going to be strong enough on the inside there, see they're hollow, I can always fill them with weld, drill it out and tap it all the way through so that it's going to be tapped all the way through. So I think that's going to work. This outer bit here, that's also going to come pretty close to contacting the swing arm when it moves over, so I'm going to have to take, I think I measured 7mm off the outside of that, which is going to leave this bearing pretty much flush, so no room for a seal. So then the bearing also butts up against the inner surface there, so I'll take a few millimeters out of that surface so the bearing can push in further, so then I'll still have room for a seal. I don't know if this is going to work, but lucky these wheels are cheap and plentiful, and it's not going to be hard for me to get another sprocket carrier if I need to, if I fuck this one up. So rather than sit here and just measure over and over and over again, I think I'm just going to start cutting into it, see if it works. Alright, we've just finished machining out the inside. Yeah, so about 6mm I took off that, just so hopefully that's going to sit down further into the wheel now, so let's go give that a test. Sweet. So that looks like, not going to get a good angle on the camera, so probably, I reckon that's dropped at maybe 4mm, but it's still, you can hear that, it's rubbing on something, so I'll just try and put some pressure on that so I get a mark. Alright, so it's just rubbing on that webbing there. You can see where it's taken the paint off where I was rubbing on it. So that means it's going to be just where that dot is there under that number. That's the section that's rubbing. So I might just hit that with the die grinder real quick and come back and see if that's going to solve that. That's all sanded back. Those bits that we're contacting. So I've just tapped the bearing back in, and I've put this O-ring back on the wheel here, which seats inside that recess there. I did a quick test fit off camera and it all seems good, so let's chuck the push drive rubber in and put it in and see how it looks. Yeah, sick. I reckon I probably haven't got my 6mm, but there's at least 5 there. Actually, let's get the verniers and have a look. Alright, what do we got? 4. Would have been good to get some more. I might still take some more off it. Actually, you know what, let's put it back in the bike and then we'll have a look where we're at. Because, yeah, it might end up being a little bit more than that when it's in the bike. Alright, I'll cut the camera, I'll come back when the wheel's mounted. We're pretty good. There's not much in it now. Like, if you stand back and have a look, it's pretty scented. I didn't take into account when I was doing my measurements before that the swing arm is actually already slightly wider on the left. You can see it here from above. So even though it's not quite centered in the swing arm, it's actually centered in the bike, well, within a couple of mil. I've got a little bit more to go. So on the carrier here, I'm going to need to take, I reckon I'll take 3 millimeters off it on the outside there. Then that'll give me room to run a spacer into the seal, and then I may also need to take some where the bearing sits in there, just so I can push the bearing further in so that the seal can still fit. And then obviously these sprocket studs are hitting the swing arm. If I move it over now, so where that's centered, they're hitting the swing arm. So I need to take those out. That's not a big deal because then I'm going to run bolts for the sprocket anyway. But then I'll have to put a sprocket back on it and just see how we're going for alignment, because I may still need to machine a little bit off the end of these, like I don't know what you call them, studs, mounts, whatever, bosses I guess, where the sprocket sits against, because if I've moved the wheel over, the sprocket was pretty good where it was, so I need to get that back. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with that. Sort of definitely pulled that out of my ass. Wasn't expecting to get that first go. So let's get the studs out for the sprocket, and we'll machine a few millimeters off the outside of this carrier now, and then see where we're at then. Alright, we just finished up in the lathe machining this carrier. I've taken quite a bit of meat out of the inside here so I can sink the bearing in further. As far as I want to take it anyway, I still need that lip to sit there so the bearing's got something to seat against. I don't want to make that any thinner because then that will potentially crack. So I think it's about 3 millimeters that I've managed to get out of that. So with the bearing sitting in there further, that means I could then take that same amount off the outside edge there. Obviously the studs are removed, so I'm going to tap this bearing back in and get the sprocket sitting on just with a couple of temporary bolts that are sort of flush mounted, and then we'll get it back in the wheel and in the swing arm and see if that's enough. I think it's going to be close, so bear with me a minute and I'll get it back together and we'll have a look. Alright, wheels back in, just set the laser up off the ceiling so that runs down the center of the engine cases, center of the frame, and then the center of the front wheel. It's probably not going to show up that well in that video, but it doesn't really matter. I could instantly see that it still needs a little bit more. I measured it, it's actually, I still need another 4 millimeters somehow. So I mean that makes sense because I needed 11 total. So far I've gained 4 millimeters out of sinking the carrier in further, and then 3 millimeters shaved off the outside here, so that's 7. So yeah, makes sense. Another 4 I still need to find. So I don't really know where we're going to find that, but I've got to find a way to make it work. Do I maybe just run the sealed bearing with no dust seal so that I can take more material off here? That's an option. I can take some off the inside of the swing arm. That's also an option. So I'm going to take it out again, hopefully for the last time, and just start investigating, see where I can find some more millimeters. It's in and it's centered. What a mission that was, just chasing millimeters. But yeah, I think we're good. So I've still got a bit of room in there to make a spacer, which is going to be a captive style spacer, which I'll explain in the next clip. So what I'll do, I'll take this wheel back out now and the carrier out, and I'll show you exactly what I ended up doing to make it work. I didn't film any of it just because it was more of the same of what I've been doing previously, but I will explain exactly what I did to find that extra space. Alright, this poor little sprocket carrier has nothing left to give, but we managed to get what we needed. So started this inside bit here. This lip here used to be 10 millimeters. Now that's sat down over here where the O-ring was. Now I measured that the absolute minimum that could be and still feel on the O-ring was 8 millimeters. So I've taken 2 millimeters off that lip there to bring this down, which then allowed the rest of the carrier to sit down further. Then the carrier was sitting on these lugs which hold the rubber cush drive. So machine 2 mil off them. Easy, done. On the rubber, that actually had a bit of spare room, so I did shave that down a little bit, but only about 1 millimeter off the drive rubber. Then that's all good. This outer lip here, I had to machine about another millimeter off that because that was catching. And then the internal webbing, I've just lineaged a little bit off them. They didn't need much, maybe 0.5 millimeter if that. So all of that work there accounted for about 2 millimeters extra. So just tap that down. So originally I only had this, got another 4 millimeters out of that, got another 2, so now the carrier is sitting in 6 millimeters. So that means I still only had to find 2 millimeters. So what I decided was, with this outer sprocket carrier bearing which sits in here, that's a 15 millimeter wide bearing, but it takes a 7 millimeter wide dust seal, and I wasn't able to find a thinner dust seal. So we'll tap the bearing in and I'll show you what my plan is now. So I know people probably cringing as I tap that in with a hammer, but whatever. It's just a bearing. I'll get another one if I stuff it up. Alright, so that's good. So I took 4 millimeters off this outside here. So that means I can no longer run that standard dust seal, which is 7 millimeters wide. Not a big deal, I've got a new plan. So what I will do instead is, you can see here I've machined a lip here. So that's 4 millimeters down and 2 millimeters in. That's because instead of running a dust seal, I will make a captive spacer like I did for the front wheel. So this the same deal here. There's no dust seal behind that, but that sits up and over the rim to sort of keep the dirt and shit out. And it's a seal bearing in there anyway, so being that it's a street bike, I think it's going to be fine. I'll just have to keep an eye on it. So I'll insert a photo here of the front spacer that I made, so you get the idea of what I'm going to do with the back one. And then anyway, I think I'm going to get on to making these rear spacers now. Alright, before I make the wheel spacers, I've got to sort out this other wheel bearing here from the inside. This is the one I haven't had one in yet. So I don't know if you remember from the start of the video, I was saying the standard bearing here has an outside diameter of 40 millimeters, inside diameter of 17, which is what the standard axle is. So going around to a bunch of different bearing shops, I tried 3 or 4. No one makes one with the 40 millimeter outside and the 20 millimeter ID. The closest I can get with a 20 millimeter ID is a 42 millimeter ID. So I did think I found one at a specialist bearing shop, but when I went and had a look at it, it's a completely different style of bearing, designed for lateral load. It's nothing like a sealed roller bearing like this, so no good. So I've got to find a way to make this work. So I've come up with an idea that is either going to be the best piece of backyard engineering you've ever seen, or I'm just going to destroy this wheel. So what I'm going to do is, I've machined up this plug here, which will fit down in the wheel there, and then it's got a little lip on it to stop it from going all the way through. Deep enough that the bearing will clear, and then I've got a pilot hole in that. And then what I've got here is a 41 millimeter hole saw. So that will press down in, use as a guide for the whole floor, and then the whole floor will just spin down obviously into the wheel itself. Now I've gone with a 41mm whole floor instead of 42 because in my experience these whole floors tend to drill a hole slightly bigger than what the size of the saw is itself. And then I just figured that I will just use a little flap wheel on the die grinder to get the extra 0.5 millimeter or so. So I really don't know if this is going to work. Well, it seems to be the theme of this build, but this is probably more risky than the other stuff I've done, because if this doesn't work then I'll destroy this wheel, and then yeah, it could be in a bit of trouble. So anyway, it's a cheap enough wheel, there's plenty of them out there. If it doesn't work, I guess I'll just have to find another one. So I'm going to tap this in, get it seated, set this up in the drill and see if it works.
Get ready, everybody. He's about to do something stupid.
Surprise, didn't work. I'm sure most of you probably saw that coming. Me too, actually, but I don't know why. I still just thought I would have a shot at it. The 41mm hole saw actually punched it out to like 43, like way too big. So I stopped before I went too deep with that. You can see I've just had to clean it up a little bit as well because it looked a bit haggard. But that internal there still needs to come out more. So I figured if the 41 made it 43, I'll try a 40, which I already had, and see if that makes it 42. But for whatever reason, the 40 just made it 40.5 in there. So now you can see the standard bearing would be loose in there, so it's bigger than 40, but I've still got a long way to go for a 42 to fit. So I don't know what I'm going to do at the moment. I'm going to go and have a look at some tool shops tomorrow and see if I can find something that will work. But I thought I'll stop now before I completely butcher it, because if I have to, I can still take it to a machine shop where they can fit this in a mill or in a bigger lathe or something and get them to take the extra 1.5 millimeters off this inside here, because I've still got 12 millimeters of height there, and that's what I need because that's the width of a bearing. So yeah, not a total disaster, but definitely not a win either. So I'll go have a look at some tool shops tomorrow and see if I can find something to do it myself, which hopefully I can. If not, we'll be taking the wheel to a machine shop. Okay, day 2, I'm getting this bearing to fit. I went to the tool shop today and got these barrel fanders here and this little flap disc that goes in the die grinder, and I think I've got it pretty close. At the moment it's at about what we got there, shade under 42 millimeters, and the bearing is 42. So I know the way I've done it is a terrible way to do it, and you should never do this, and it should be machined, blah blah blah, but whatever, if it works, it works. So I've just got the bearing in the freezer at the moment. I'm just going to put a little bit of heat on this hub to try and expand this a bit, and then we'll see if it taps in. It's in there, it's seated, so I think we're okay. It tapped in with just a little bit of resistance, which is what you want. So the test now is I will put this sprocket carrier back on and attempt to slide the axle through, and we'll see if I manage to keep it true, because that's what I was worried about when I was doing it with the grinding disc, is that there's a chance that it would be slightly out of round, and if that happens then the bearing would be slightly misaligned with the outside bearings and the axle wouldn't slide through. So I'll put the phone down and we'll have a look if it's going to go through. Sweet. Perfect. Couldn't have gone any better. Well, it could have, but it worked, so that's all that matters. Awesome. Let's start making some wheel spaces. Nearly forgot the cross tube. Always nearly forget this. I didn't have one, so I had to make one just out of some scrap tube. But obviously, slots down in there. I'm sure everyone knows what one of these are. Alright, that's it. A lot of work for something that is really boring, really, but had to be done. So, wheels centered, spins nice and freely. I've got the spacer made up for this side, captive style spacer to try and keep dust out of that bearing, as there's no dust seal on that now. On the other side here, I've just got a temporary spacer sitting in there. There's the correct width. That's because I'm going to have to make a rear brake caliper hanger and new spacer for this side. So do that in the next video, try to get the rear brakes sorted on it. I'm going to use this caliper which was on the CBR 125 just with a custom hanger. So that's coming up next. Sprocket alignment seems pretty good. I had a chain sitting on top of it before. I think that's within 1 millimeter or so. I'll have to double check it when I get the new sprockets. So I've got to get some new sprockets ordered for it. I'm going to replace the 13 on the front with a 15. I'm going to put a 50 tooth on the rear. So that's going to make the gearing a little bit longer than what a standard CRF 450 is, which is what I want, seeing that it's going to be a street bike, and then also because it's got the smaller back wheel, it would spin a little bit faster anyway, so I want some taller gearing on it. What else we got? I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but I'm pretty happy that I managed to get most of it just with the sprocket carrier. So that means I can get another couple of wheels, because these wheels are everywhere and they're cheap. And then that way I can keep spare set of tyres on it, and then if I'm at the track, it's just a case of pulling the wheel out and swapping the modified sprocket carrier in. I'll just have to get the other wheels machined out for that bearing, which is a pretty easy job. Yeah, so we're going to leave this video here for now. Next video is going to be the rear brakes, getting those sorted. I'm going to get a kickstart on it, get that sorted, and then I want to try and get the radiator mounted and have a look at how we're going to run the radiator hoses, get all the cooling system dialed in. Again, I'm going to use the CBR 125 radiator for now, because that looks like that'll do the job, but we'll see. That's all for next video. So thanks for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.